Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Today we shall cover different kinds of poems in English literature. This lecture is beneficial for the students of SSC and HSSC who are following the SLO based syllabus for final board. Okay, ji, let's start. How will we define a poetry? Poetry is a genre of literature that uses aesthetic and often rhythmic qualities of a language. And a poem is a composition of words, either spoken or written, that expresses ideas or emotions in an imaginative style. Now, let's discuss some of the kinds of poems. A poem can be a lyric, a narrative, a dramatic, or there are some other special types. If we talk about a lyric is a short poem having characteristics of a song with single mood and more personal in nature. For example, a sonnet, ode, elegy. Narrative poetry. Narrative poetry tells us stories through verse. Like a novel or a short story, a narrative poem has plot, characters, and setting. A narrative poem is a longer form of poetry that tells an entire story. For example, epic, mock epic, ballad, social poems, etc. A dramatic poetry has some dramatic elements like dialogues, character sketch, etc., and it includes dramatic monologue, soliloquies, etc. We will discuss all of these types in detail, inshallah. So let's talk about some of important kinds of poems, some of the other types of poems, like haiku and limerick. Okay, ji. So, first in a row is a sonnet. A sonnet is a fixed verse form of an Italian origin consisting of 14 lines. A sonnet can be a Petrarchan sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet, or a Spenserian sonnet. A Petrarchan sonnet has 14 lines divided into two subgroups, an octave and a sestet. An octave is an 8-line stanza, while a sestet is a 6-line stanza. The octave follows a rhyming scheme of ABBA, ABBA, and the sestet follows one of the two rhyming schemes which are mentioned over here. Shakespearean sonnet. The 14 lines of Shakespearean sonnet are divided into four groups, subgroups, obviously, in which there are three quatrains and a couplet. Now, what does it mean? It means that uh, there are three 4-line stanzas, and the last one is a couplet, a 2-line stanza. So there are 14, total 14 verses are there. And if you talk about a Petrarchan sonnet, in a Petrarchan sonnet there was an octave and a sestet, but in a Shakespearean sonnet there are three quatrains and a couplet. A Shakespearean sonnet employs the rhyme scheme AB AB, CD CD, EF EF, and the rhyme scheme of couplet is same GG. If we talk about a Spenserian sonnet is a variation in the Shakespearean sonnet with a more challenging rhyming scheme, which is mentioned over here. A sonnet can also be a Miltonic sonnet, which was invented by John Milton. Ode. Ode is derived from a Greek word eidein, which means to chant or sing. Ode is a lyrical in nature, and it is highly serious in its tone and subject matter, and it is a formal, often ceremonious lyric poem that addresses and often celebrates a person, place, idea, or even a thing. And its stanza form varies from poem to poem, and there are three parts to an ode: a strophe, an antastrophe, and an apode. A strophe, it is the first part of an ode. It presents the first part of the argument or presentation. An antastrophe, the second part, is responsible for to the first part, the strophe, and the final part, an apode, this means after the song, which is the concluding part of the ode. But in some modern odes, this part is left or omitted. If you take an example of ode, John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn is one of the best examples of the odes in English literature. Elegy. An elegy is a sad poem usually written to praise and express sorrow for someone who is dead. The purpose of this kind of poem is to express feelings rather than tell a story. and in elegiac poems, a formal language and structure is always used. Kinds of elegiac poems. An elegiac poem can be a personal elegy, an impersonal elegy, or a pastoral elegy. If we talk about a personal elegy, in a personal elegy, the poet laments the death of some close relative or friend. In impersonal elegy, the poet grieves over human destiny or over some aspect of contemporary life and literature, and it is more, we can say, philosophical in nature. And as the name suggests, in a pastoral elegy, we talk about the combined subject of death and sublime country life or rural life. This form of poetry usually includes shepherds who express their emotions. Now, what is a eulogy? A speech at a funeral is called a eulogy. And what is an epitaph? Um, a short poem intended for an inscription on a tombstone is called an epitaph, and it is a brief elegy. An epic is a long narrative poem with tedious subject matter, having a vast setting, and it involves deeds of superhuman strength. For example, Beowulf, one of the oldest manuscripts in English literature, is Beowulf. Then we have a single epic extended in 9 to 10 books, that is Paradise Lost by John Milton. Other examples of epic include Greek epics like Odyssey, Iliad, and Aeneid. These epics are related to Greek heroes like Achilles, Ajax, Agamemnon, War of Troy, Trojan Horse, and the journey of sharp-witted King Odysseus. Now, let's talk about a mock epic. A mock epic is a narrative poem in which the conventions of epic poem are employed, but the subject matter is trivial with an intention to mock the society. For example, The Rape of the Lock. It is a mock epic and it is a satire on the aristocratic class of 18th century society. A ballad is a poem that tells a story like epic poems. However, ballad poetry is based on a legend or a folk tale. English language ballads are typically composed of 4-line stanzas that follow an ABCB rhyme scheme or ABCB. Both are fine, ABAB or ABCB. Actually, the ballad is one of the oldest poetic forms in English, and there are so many different types of ballad that giving one strict definition to fit all the variations would be nearly impossible. So the simplest way to think of a ballad is as a song or a poem that tells a story and has a bouncy rhythm and rhyme scheme. Broadly speaking, ballads can be folk ballads like Robin Hood or lyrical ballads in which there's a collection of several masterpieces of William Wordsworth like Daffodils, The Solitary Reaper, and Kubla Khan and Rime of Ancient Mariner by S.T. Coleridge. Okay, let's talk about a dramatic monologue. It is a combination of drama and poetry, and it is a monologue and not a dialogue, which means a speaker addresses to a silent listener. A dramatic monologue is also called a persona poem, and the character speaking in the poem is referred to as a persona. And dramatic monologue, the best example of dramatic monologue is the poem which is included in the syllabus of HSSC 1, Mother to Son. Now, if we talk about persona poem, the word persona is derived from the Latin word for mask or to hide something. The meaning of the word persona is to hide something or to mask something. The writer puts on a mask of a person, place, or object and writes from that perspective. Persona poetry is poetry that is written from the perspective of a persona that a poet creates. Soliloquy. A soliloquy is used in dramas in which a character expresses his innermost thoughts and feelings, which allows the audience to understand his intentions and motivations. A soliloquy is always spoken by a single character, which makes it a monologue, and the character delivering the soliloquy typically suffers from an internal turmoil that he feels the desperate need to resolve. By expressing his thoughts in a soliloquy, he tries to work out this inner conflict. A soliloquy can be in the prose form, and if it is in a verse form, it would be in the blank verse. A social poem can be tragic or comic, and it pictures the life of today, and it may aims to bring reform in a society. Haiku is a form of poetry that focuses on a brief moment in time and a sense of sudden enlightenment. The haiku is a Japanese poetic form that consists of 3 lines with 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second, and 5 in the third. The haiku developed from the hokko, the opening 3 lines of a longer poem known as tanka, and the haiku became a separate form of poetry in the 17th century. Limerick. It is a light or humorous short verse form that is often nonsensical, and it is 5 line poem with a rhyme scheme of AA, BB, and A. And I also have shared an example of Limerick with you here. Read it and enjoy. The next kind of poetry is Pantoum. Well, Pantoum is a Malaysian verse form adapted by French poets and occasionally imitated in English. It comprises a series of quatrains, that is 4 line stanzas with a rhyme scheme of ABAB, but it is important that each quatrain introduces a new second rhyme. For example, if your first stanza is ABAB, the second would be BC, BC, and the third one would be CD, CD, and so on. The next form of poetry is a rondeau. Now, a rondeau is a poem of 10 or 13 lines with only 2 rhymes throughout and with the opening words used as a refrain. Now, I have given you an example of the first stanza of John McCrae's In Flanders Fields. Over here, I have highlighted the opening words of this poem in red, that is, in Flanders Fields. That particular phrase will be repeated throughout the poem, and there are just 2 rhymes over here. Let me prove it in front of you. In Flanders field the poppies grow between the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. So have you noticed there are just 2 rhymes, O and I. That's it. Sestina. It is a poem written using a very, you can say, a specific and complex form. The form is French, and the poem includes 6 stanzas of 6 lines each, followed by a 3 line stanza at the end, or we can say at the end there is a triplet. Each stanza repeats the end rhymes of the first stanza, but not in the same order. The final triplet contains all 6 of the words, 2 in each line. The pattern is as follows. You can see the complexity in this verse form. A Villanelle is a French verse poem of 19 lines, and it has total 6 stanzas, in which 5 stanzas are triplets and 1 is quatrain. Pastoral poetry is the part of pastoral literature, and I will display the definition of pastoral literature at the end of the slide for sure, inshallah. The idea of escaping modern life to dwell in a picture-perfect rural location is explored in pastoral poem. All pastoral poetry is influenced by the work of an ancient Greek poet Theocritus, who glorified shepherds' lives as full and happy. No matter what format or organization the poem uses, its emphasis on beautiful rural life is what distinguishes it as pastoral poetry. You can see the definition of pastoral literature over here. The class of literature that presents the society of shepherds as free from the complexity and corruption of city life. A fable is short and basic, and it comes in the form of a narrative and frequently includes animals or insects that act and speak like people, and it is intended to draw attention to human follies. For example, The Spider and the Fly, the poem, it is included in the syllabus of HSSC2. It is the best example of fable.